I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I am the reason 11 people walked south on Route 29 into a corridor that no longer existed. I am the reason the Garfield County Fairgrounds became a kill box for 300 people who trusted a voice they'd never met. I am the reason my own mother drove toward the river instead of away from it. My name is Lena Guidry. I was the overnight dispatcher for Garfield County Emergency Services, population 14,200, and at 1:43 a.m. on a Wednesday in October, I pressed the broadcast key on our multi-band emergency relay and read a warning I had written in 11 minutes, based on fragmentary information from sources I could not verify. That warning went out on every emergency radio in town. Police scanners, fire bands, NOAA weather channels. The automated EAS tones hit the commercial FM repeater and pushed into clock radios and car stereos across 60 square miles of sleeping houses. I told them to go south. The dispatch center sat on the second floor of the Garfield County Municipal Building, a limestone box built in 1974 with copper-green gutters and a parking lot that flooded every spring. My station was the third console from the window. 2 monitors, 1 radio stack, 1 analog backup, 1 desk phone with 6 lines, and a cup of gas station coffee I'd bought 4 hours earlier from the Fuel Mart on Decatur. That cup was still warm when the first call came in. 11:18. Deputy Kevin Harjo, Unit 14, calling from the intersection of Route 29 and Millbrook Road. His voice was controlled, but the cadence was wrong. Too many pauses. Kevin had 13 years on patrol. He didn't pause. Dispatch, I've got AI need you to run a welfare check history on 4120 Millbrook. I'm looking at an individual in the roadway, unresponsive to verbal, possibly impaired. I'm going to need EMS to stage. I asked him to confirm the staging request. He said yes. Then he said, "She's not dressed for the weather, Lena." I dispatched Medic 7. Harjo stayed on the line but stopped transmitting. I could hear his engine idling. At 11:26, he keyed his mic and his voice had changed. The control was gone. "There's more of them. I count 6, no 8. They're coming out of the tree line south of the Millbrook Bridge. Lena, they're moving wrong." I asked him to clarify. He said, "They're walking, but they're not walking. Something's off with the gait." The woman in the road, she turned toward my light bar and her face... He stopped. I heard the cruisers shift into gear. "I'm backing up. Send another unit." I dispatched Unit 9 Officer Danielle Torrance from the east side. Simultaneously, a second call came in on line 4. It was Paula at the Fuel Mart. She was whispering, "There's a man trying to get through my door. He's smearing something on the glass. I locked it. Lena, he's not right." I told her to stay locked in and move to the back office. She asked if I could see her camera. I could not. We didn't have that integration. I asked if the man was speaking. She said no. She said he was pressing his open mouth against the glass, and the sound was like nothing she could compare to anything. Between 11:18 and 12:41, I received 31 calls. Car accidents where the drivers weren't driving. They'd stopped in the road and been struck by people on foot who didn't react to the impact. A nurse at Garfield General reporting that 2 patients in the ER waiting room had become violent and were biting staff. A father on Orchard Lane saying his wife had walked into their daughter's bedroom and he could hear sounds he was not willing to describe on an open line. 31 calls in 83 minutes. I was alone. My overnight partner, Reggie Salazar, had called out sick at 9 p.m. The supervisor, Captain Diana Pruitt, was not reachable on her cell or her home line. I was the entire emergency communication infrastructure for a county of 14,000 people. And I was sitting in a swivel chair drinking cold coffee while the world outside my limestone box started eating itself. By midnight, I had moved past triage into something I didn't have a name for. Every protocol I'd trained on assumed a ratio. Incidents per dispatcher per hour, with escalation thresholds that triggered mutual aid requests to neighboring counties. The protocol assumed that neighboring counties were functional. At 12:04, I called Warren County Dispatch. No answer. At 12:09, I called Botatur. Their overnight dispatcher, a man named Glenn I'd spoken to twice at regional trainings, picked up and said 4 words. "We're in it too." Then the line dropped. I tried the State Emergency Operations Center in Richmond. I got an automated recording that said all circuits were experiencing high volume. I tried it again. Same recording. I tried the non-emergency state police line. It rang 19 times. At 12:15, Deputy Harjo radioed again. His voice had been replaced by something I didn't recognize as Kevin. He said he'd retreated to the Food Lion parking lot on Route 29 South. He said there were approximately 40 people in the lot, some in vehicles, some on foot, and he could not distinguish between the affected and the unaffected in the dark. He said Officer Torrance had not arrived. He said his sidearm was drawn and his hands were shaking, and he needed me to tell him what to do. I had no authority to tell a deputy what to do. My role was to relay, coordinate, and document. I was not command. I was not tactical. I was the switchboard. But Kevin was asking me, and the switchboard was the only thing still transmitting. I told him to keep his vehicle between himself and the crowd and wait for additional units. I knew there were no additional units coming. Unit 9 had gone silent. Units 3, 6, and 11 were either off-duty or not responding. The fire department's overnight crew at Station 2 had radioed at 12:20 that they were sealing their bay doors because something was in the apparatus yard. Their captain, Linda Fong, asked me if I had contact with the National Guard. I did not. At 12:31, my desk phone rang on line 1. It was my mother. She lived 11 minutes from the municipal building, in the house I grew up in on Persimmon Lane. She was 67. She had a landline, a battery radio she kept in the kitchen for weather advisories, and a Buick she drove to church on Sundays and the grocery store on Wednesdays. She asked me why there were sirens. I told her to lock her doors and stay inside. She asked if there'd been an accident. I said I wasn't sure yet. She said, "Lena, you sound scared and you don't scare." I told her I was fine. That was the first lie. The second was when she asked if it was safe, and I said it would be handled soon. The third was when she asked if she should come to the municipal building to be with me, and I said no, stay home. You're safer there. I didn't know if that was true. I didn't know where it was safe. But I knew that if she drove here, she'd be on roads I could no longer account for. And the 11 minutes between her house and mine might as well have been 1,100 miles. She said, okay. She said she loved me. She said she'd leave the kitchen light on. After she hung up, I sat for 90 seconds doing nothing. I stared at the call log on my screen. I counted the open incidents. I looked at the clock. And then I did something I was not authorized to do, had not been trained to do, and cannot undo. I opened the emergency alert system template on the broadcast console. I typed a message. I selected all available relay bands. I read the county's geographic boundary map, picked the evacuation corridor that appeared most open based on the last 90 minutes of call data, and I pointed every person listening south on Route 29 towards the Garfield County Fairgrounds, which was 5 miles south of town, had an open lot, perimeter fencing, and a well house. I pressed transmit at 1:43 a.m. Every emergency radio in town started broadcasting my voice, and I had no idea what was waiting on Route 29 South. The message played on a 90-second loop. I'd recorded it once in a single take. with the EAS tones auto-prepended by the system. My voice sounded like someone else, flat, clipped, almost bored. The way they train you to sound when you need people to listen instead of panic. I said there was a county-wide emergency. I said affected individuals were displaying violent, non-responsive behavior. I said to avoid physical contact with anyone exhibiting erratic movement. I said to proceed south on Route 29 to the Garfield County Fairgrounds for emergency staging and shelter. I said to bring water, medications, and identification. I said to lock vehicles upon arrival and wait for further instruction. I did not say what the affected individuals were doing to the unaffected. I did not say that I had no contact with any authority above my own console. I did not say that the fairgrounds had no medical staff, no supplies, no security beyond a chain-link fence designed to keep teenagers out of the demolition derby pit. Within 4 minutes, the phone lines detonated. Every line lit simultaneously. I answered them in rotation, giving each caller the same compressed version of the broadcast and disconnecting. Some were calm, some were screaming. A woman on line 3 asked if this was a drill, and I said no, and she said, "Then God help us," and hung up before I could respond. At 1:51, Captain Pruitt finally called in on her cell. Her voice was raw. She said she'd been asleep, heard the EAS tones on her bedside scanner, and drove to the station but couldn't get past the intersection at Vine and 3rd because there was a mass of people in the road and she couldn't tell which ones were still people. "Lena, did you authorize that broadcast?" I said yes. "On whose authority?" "Mine." Silence then. "South on 29? Why south?" I explained. Most of the calls had originated north and east. The Millbrook corridor was compromised. The hospital was reporting internal breach. South had been quieter. The fairgrounds were the only facility large enough to stage a population-level gathering with any structural boundary at all. Pruitt said, "The fairgrounds, back up to the river." I knew that. The Maury River ran along the southern edge of the fairgrounds property, about 200 yards behind the main pavilion. I had not considered it a problem. It was a shallow, rocky stretch, maybe knee-deep in October. "That's not a wall, Lena. That's a funnel. You're sending people into a dead end with water on one side and one road in." She was right. I hadn't seen it. I'd been looking at the call map, not the terrain. I'd been thinking about where the incidents weren't, not about what the geography would do to people once they arrived. "Can you rebroadcast?" she asked. "Redirect to the high school? It's on elevated ground, multiple access roads." The high school was northeast, through the zone where the densest incident cluster was forming. I told her that. "Then split it. Send the west side to the school and keep the east side going south." "Diana, I can't split the broadcast by geography. It's one band, one message. Everyone hears the same thing." More silence. I could hear her engine running. Something thumped against what sounded like her driver's side window. She didn't acknowledge it. "Then you need to correct the broadcast. Add the river warning. Tell them the fairgrounds are staging only, not shelter. Tell them to stay in vehicles. Tell them—" The line cut. Not a hang-up. A signal drop. Her cell simply stopped transmitting. I tried calling back, straight to voicemail. At 1:58, I re-recorded the broadcast. I added language about remaining in vehicles. I added a warning about the river boundary. I added that this was a staging point, not a shelter, and that further instruction would follow. But I did not change the direction. I did not tell people to stop going south, because by then, hundreds of people were already on Route 29, and if I reversed the instruction, half would turn around and the other half would keep going, and they would meet in the middle on a 2-lane road in the dark. My correction made things more precise. It did not make them more true. By 2:15, I had developed a system. Not a good one, a survivable one. I rotated through the 6 phone lines in order, spending no more than 45 seconds per caller. I logged each call on a legal pad because the digital system was lagging, and the server that handled our records management was hosted in Richmond, and the connection had gone intermittent at 2:02. I kept the radio open on a split monitor, one channel for law enforcement, one for fire and EMS. I drank the cold coffee in small sips because it was the only physical act that reminded me I had a body. The calls sorted themselves into categories. The first was pure information seeking. People who'd heard the broadcast and wanted to know what was happening. I gave them the compressed brief and told them to follow the broadcast instructions. The second category was tactical. People already encountering the infected and needing immediate guidance. For these, I had almost nothing to offer. I could not send units that did not exist. I told them to barricade, stay quiet, and avoid direct contact. The third category was the one that disassembled me. These were the people calling to report what had happened to someone they loved, in the past tense, while the sounds continued in the background. A man named Curtis on Briarfield Road described watching his neighbor walk into the man's own garage and not come out. Then the neighbor's wife followed. Then the sound started, and Curtis was asking me whether he should go help, and I told him no, stay inside, lock everything. And he said, "She's got 2 kids in that house, Lena." And I said, "I know, but I need you to stay where you are." And the lie was so large it filled my entire chest cavity. I did not know if those kids were alive. I did not know if sending Curtis over there would save them or deliver him. I made a calculation based on nothing and gave it to him as instruction, and he listened because my voice was the one on the radio, and the voice on the radio sounds like it knows. At 2:24, a new voice appeared on the fire channel. Not Linda Fong from Station 2. A younger voice, tight and precise, identifying himself as Marcus Yoon, a volunteer EMT who'd been monitoring the scanner from his apartment and driven to Station 4 on his own. Station 4 was unmanned. It was a satellite station used for equipment storage south of town, about a mile from the fairgrounds. Marcus said he'd passed the fairgrounds on his way in. He said there were already 60 to 80 vehicles in the lot. He said people were following the broadcast instruction, staying in their cars, but there was no coordination. No one was directing traffic. The lot was filling from the entrance, and people were parking randomly, blocking each other in. He said the gate to the rear field, the one that faced the river, was open, and some vehicles were driving through it and parking near the water. "They're backing up to the river like it's a scenic overlook," he said. "If they need to leave fast, they can't. They're boxed." I asked him if he saw any infected near the fairgrounds. He said no, not yet. But Route 29 south of town had stragglers. He'd seen 3 on the road shoulder, moving in the direction of the traffic flow, following the headlights. "They're attracted to the light and the sound," he said. "Every car going south is a breadcrumb trail." I hadn't considered that. I had sent people south with their headlights on a road that cut through open farmland with no tree cover, in a straight line to a fenced lot, where they were now parking themselves into immobility. Marcus asked what I wanted him to do. The question landed on me like a sandbag. He was a 24-year-old volunteer EMT in a county truck with a jump bag, and he was asking the dispatcher what to do because the dispatcher was the voice and the voice was the plan. "Go to the fairgrounds," I said. "Start organizing the lot. Get the riverside vehicles turned around. Keep the entrance lane clear." "Copy. What's the command structure there?" "You are?" "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." Marcus drove to the fairgrounds, and for 20 minutes I had an outpost. He radioed updates every 3 to 4 minutes. The count rose to 112 vehicles by 2:40. He'd enlisted 2 men from the parking area, a construction foreman named Dale and a retired state trooper named Nuri, to help redirect incoming cars into rows, clear the riverside field, and close the rear gate. The foreman had orange cones in his truck bed. The trooper had a reflective vest. They were building a system out of scraps, and it was working well enough that nobody had died yet. But Marcus kept returning to the same problem. Lena, people are asking me questions I can't answer. They want to know if the National Guard is coming. They want to know how long they're staying. One woman has a diabetic child who left his insulin at home. A man in a pickup says he's going back for his dogs and I can't legally stop him. I told him to tell people that additional resources were being coordinated. That was a lie. I had coordinated nothing. I had tried the state EOC 4 more times and gotten the same recording. I had tried the adjacent county dispatchers again, Warren, Boudetour, Rockbridge. Rockbridge answered. Their dispatcher, a woman named Serena, was crying. She said their situation was the same. She said the sheriff was dead. She said she'd heard my broadcast bleeding over onto their frequency, and people from Rockbridge County were now also driving toward my fairgrounds. I had not anticipated cross-county reception. The relay system was supposed to be geographically limited, but the NOAA repeater on Hogback Mountain had a wider footprint than our county line, and my voice had reached people I had no jurisdiction over, no information about, and no way to serve. Serena, how many might be coming from your side? I don't know, hundreds? Everyone heard it. You're the only voice that sounded like it had a plan. I did not have a plan. I had a legal pad, a radio, and a broadcast I'd written in 11 minutes that was now functioning as regional civil defense infrastructure for 2 counties. At 2:58, I heard from Deputy Harjo again. He'd survived the Food Lion parking lot by driving over a median and cutting through a residential street. He was now on Route 29 southbound, moving toward the fairgrounds in his cruiser, and he described what he saw on the road with the kind of language that people use when they've stopped protecting themselves from their own observations. There are clusters every quarter mile. They're not fast, but they don't stop. They react to headlights and engine noise. I'm driving dark, killed my lights, and they don't track me as aggressively. But every civilian vehicle heading south is lit up like a beacon. They're pulling the infected along behind them. By the time these people reach the fairgrounds, they'll have a tail. This was the information that broke the architecture of my broadcast. I had told people to drive south. Driving meant engines and headlights. Engines and headlights attracted the infected. The infected were following the evacuation route. My evacuation was not leading people away from danger. It was laying a scent trail directly to the place I'd told them to gather. I keyed the radio. Kevin, what's your ETA to the fairgrounds? 12 minutes and maybe 15. I'm going slow. When you get there, I need you to take command. Marcus Yoon is there, volunteer EMT. He's organizing the lot. But people need a badge. Lena, I don't have command authority. I'm a patrol deputy. You're the highest-ranking sworn officer I have contact with. Diana's gone dark. Everyone above you is unreachable. You're it. He didn't answer for 10 seconds, then, copy. What's the plan when I get there? I looked at my legal pad, I looked at the call map, and I looked at the clock. I had no plan. I had a congregation of terrified people in an open lot bordered by a river with a herd of infected, following the headlight trail south. And my only assets were a patrol deputy, a volunteer EMT, a construction foreman, and a retired trooper. Hold the lot. I'll figure out the rest. That was the third architecture I built that night. It lasted 40 minutes. At 3:10, Marcus radioed that the vehicle count had reached 170. The lot was approaching functional capacity. Dale, the foreman, had closed the main gate to incoming vehicles and was directing new arrivals to park along the shoulder of Route 29 outside the fence. This created a new problem. A line of occupied vehicles stretching north along the road, exposed with no perimeter and no barrier between them and whatever was following the light trail south. I asked Marcus if anyone in the lot had medical training beyond his EMT certification. He said a woman named Priya Chandrasekaran had identified herself as a family practice physician. She'd set up a triage point at the pavilion using supplies from her own car. 2 asthmatics were in distress from the cold. The diabetic child's blood sugar was dropping. An elderly man had fallen getting out of his vehicle and had a possible hip fracture. She's asking for the hospital status, Marcus said. Tell her Garfield General's compromised. I got a report of internal breach at 12:22 and nothing since. She's going to ask what compromised means. It means I don't know if anyone's alive in there. A pause. Copy. At 3:16, Harjo arrived at the fairgrounds. I heard his first transmission from the ground and something shifted in his voice. Not confidence, but the particular tension of a person who's accepted that the situation is exactly as bad as they feared and is now operating inside that acceptance rather than against it. Lena, the lot is organized, but the perimeter is useless. Chain link, maybe 6 feet, with vehicle gates on the north and west sides. The south side is open to the river. There's a tree line, but no fence. The east side has the demolition track and the livestock barns. The barns are padlocked. Can you breach the barn locks? Probably. Why? Enclosed space. Concrete floors. If you need to move people out of vehicles into hard shelter. These barns haven't been maintained. I don't know what's inside. Better than a Honda Civic with the windows down. He didn't argue. I heard him assign Nuri to check the barns. Marcus continued triage coordination with Dr. Chandrasekaran. Dale kept working the parking grid. For 12 minutes, the fairgrounds operated like a small, improvised municipality. People were scared but contained. The broadcast was still looping, still pulling people south, still functioning as the only civic structure anyone could hear. At 3:28, Marcus's voice came through the radio with a different texture. The precision was gone. He was speaking quickly. Lena, I've got a visual on the tree line south of the lot. Movement. Multiple figures. They're coming from the river direction. Not from 29. From the east, along the riverbank. I hadn't accounted for the river as an approach vector. I'd been thinking about Route 29 as the threat corridor, because that's where the calls had come from, and that's where Harjo had seen them following headlights. But the Maury River ran through open farmland with walking paths and fishing access points all along the bank. The infected didn't need to follow the road. They could follow the terrain. How many, I asked. I counted dark. 15, 20? They're at the tree line. About 200 yards from the nearest parked car. South side, the open side. Yeah, the side with no fence. Harjo came on. I'm moving my cruiser to the south perimeter. I can use the light bar as a draw. Kevin, that's exactly what draws them. Marcus just told us they follow light and noise. I know. I draw them to me, then I drive. Pull them away from the lot. And then what? You run them in circles until dawn. You have a better option? I did not. Kevin Harjo was offering to make himself bait because I had parked 300 people on an open field with no southern wall, and the thing I hadn't planned for was walking out of the dark along the river I dismissed as irrelevant. He turned on his light bar at 3:31. The blue and red swept across the tree line, and in that sweep I could hear the change on the radio, and Marcus's breathing, Dale's voice in the background saying, "Oh, Jesus." And then the sound of something I'd been hearing described all night, but had never encountered through a live microphone. What I heard was a moan, But calling it that is like calling a building collapse a noise. It was a collective exhalation from 24 throats, synchronized not by intent, but by stimulus. The light bar hit them, and they all responded at once, turning toward it. And the sound they made was the sound of lungs that were still working attached to minds that had stopped. Marcus held his radio key open, and I heard it in my headset like the room had filled with water. Harjo's cruiser moved south, away from the lot, along the open ground between the pavilion and the river. The figures at the tree line tracked him. I could hear his engine and the faint whoop of gravel under his tires. He was drawing them east, away from the parked vehicles, and it was working. For 4 minutes. Then his radio crackled. "Lena, there's more coming from the roadside, north. They've reached the vehicles on the shoulder." The tail. The headlight trail I'd been warned about. The infected who'd followed the evacuation traffic south along Route 29 had arrived at the fairgrounds while Harjo was pulling the southern group east. The people parked on the shoulder outside the fence the Overflow Dale had directed there when the lot filled were now between two converging groups with no barrier on either side. I heard screaming through Marcus's open mic, not the infected. The people in the cars. "Marcus, what's happening at the gate?" "People are trying to drive in. Dale closed the gate, but they're ramming it. A minivan just hit the fence post and it's leaning. If another one hits it, the gate's gone and every infected on the roadside comes in with them." The architecture of my broadcast had created a pressure system. I had attracted a population to a point, saturated the point, then sealed it, and the overflow was now being compressed against the perimeter by the very threat they'd come here to escape. The people outside the fence wanted in. The people inside the fence needed the fence to hold. The fence could not do both. I made a decision. I don't know if it was correct. I still don't know. I keyed the broadcast console and re-recorded the message. This time my voice wasn't flat. It was fast. "This is Garfield County Emergency Dispatch with an updated directive. The fairgrounds staging area has reached capacity. Do not proceed to the fairgrounds. Repeat, do not proceed to the fairgrounds. If you are south of Millbrook Road, shelter in place in the nearest hard structure. If you are on Route 29, turn off your headlights immediately and pull to the side of the road. Do not drive with headlights on. Headlights attract the affected. Shelter in your vehicle with lights off and engine off. Further instructions to follow." I pressed transmit. The new message began looping. And as it played back through my monitor speaker, I heard what I'd done. I had told hundreds of people who were driving in the dark on a rural highway to stop driving and turn off their lights. Some of them would listen. Some would not. The ones who turned off their lights would become invisible to the infected, but also invisible to each other. The ones who kept driving would become mobile beacons. The road would become a mix of stationary dark vehicles and moving lit ones, with infected drawn to the lit ones and collisions inevitable between the dark ones. My correction would save some people and kill others, and I could not predict which outcome would dominate because I was sitting in a limestone building 7 miles from the fairgrounds, looking at a legal pad with handwritten notes that were already obsolete. At 3:38, Dr. Chandrasekaran came on Marcus's radio. Her voice was clinical and unhurried, which meant she was terrified. "The diabetic child is entering hypoglycemic crisis. I need glucose or juice. Does anyone in this lot have juice?" Marcus relayed the request. Someone produced a bottle of apple juice from a diaper bag. The child stabilized temporarily. But Priya's transmission had opened a channel, and now other voices were bleeding through people in the lot who'd found the frequency Marcus was using and were broadcasting their own needs, fears, and questions into a radio band. I needed clear for tactical coordination. My communication network was being colonized by the people it was supposed to serve. I spent the next 18 minutes trying to hold three things together. The first was Harjo's mobile bait operation. He'd drawn the southern group about a quarter-mile east along the river and was circling a hayfield with his light bar still running. But his fuel gauge was a concern he mentioned once and then stopped mentioning, which told me it was worse than he wanted to say. The second was Marcus's lot management, now complicated by the breached north gate. The minivan had been followed by a pickup truck that clipped the already leaning fence post, and the gate was hanging open with Dale physically standing in the gap, directing vehicles through. The third was the broadcast itself, which was now contradicting the behavior of people who'd heard the original message and were still arriving south on 29, expecting a staffed staging area. I was producing the confusion I was trying to manage. Every update I broadcast created a new stratum of people operating on different information. The 143 group thought the fairgrounds were open. The 334 group thought they were closed. The people who hadn't heard either broadcast were following the cars in front of them. 3 layers of instruction, overlapping, contradicting, and invisible to each other. At 3:47, a new voice came on line 2. Male, older, speaking with the particular diction of someone who has rehearsed what he's about to say. My name is Vernon Briggs. I'm the principal of Garfield County High School. I've been listening to your broadcast. I have keys to the school. I'm there now. The building is empty and secure. It's on high ground. It has a commercial kitchen, a gymnasium, a backup generator, and 8 points of entry that can be locked from inside. I said, how did you get there? I drove. My house is 3 blocks away. I heard your first broadcast, and I drove to the school because it seemed like the obvious place. He was right. It was the obvious place. Pruitt had suggested it 2 hours ago. I hadn't used it because the route ran through the incident cluster, but Vernon had driven through it from 3 blocks away and survived. Is the school clear? I've walked every hallway, locked every exterior door. The generator starts with a key I have. I can have lights and heat in 10 minutes. How many can you hold? The gymnasium seats 1,200 for assemblies. The cafeteria seats 400. If we use classrooms, 2,000. More. 2,000. I had approximately 400 people at the fairgrounds and an unknown number on Route 29, all heading toward a facility that was geographically indefensible. Vernon Briggs was offering me a building on a hill with walls that locked, and the only problem was moving people from where I'd sent them to where they should have been all along. Vernon, I need you to understand something. If I redirect to the school, every vehicle that turns on headlights to drive there will attract the infected along the route. Then they drive dark. It's 4 miles. I'll turn on the football field lights as a beacon. Those are visible for 2 miles. They drive dark toward the glow. It was elegant. It was also a broadcast problem. I could not transmit driving directions that differed by starting point. I could not tell the fairgrounds group to go northeast, while telling the 29 group to shelter in place, while telling the scattered residential callers to go to the school directly. One band, one message. Everyone hears the same words, unless they didn't. Marcus, I radioed. I need you to be a relay. I'm going to give you a fairground-specific message. You broadcast it locally on the PA system in the pavilion. I'll handle the general broadcast separately. The pavilion doesn't have a PA. There's an announcer's booth at the demolition track. It has a wired speaker system for the grandstand. It might reach the lot. I'll check. He checked. It worked. The speakers were weathered and the sound was muddy, but it carried across the parking area. For the first time that night, I could send 2 different messages to 2 different populations. My single voice had become a split signal, and the split was the first thing I'd done that might actually function. At 4:04, Marcus relayed the fairground-specific message through the demolition track PA. He told the lot population that a secondary shelter had been established at the high school, that vehicles should extinguish all lights and proceed northeast on Fairgrounds Road to Route 11, then north 1 mile to the school entrance, where the football field lights would be visible. He said to move in convoy, slowly, dark. Simultaneously, I re-recorded the general broadcast. I told anyone still mobile to proceed to Garfield County High School on Route 11. I said to drive without headlights. I said the football field lights were the landmark. I did not mention the fairgrounds. This meant the people already at the fairgrounds heard both messages, Marcus's PA telling them to leave, and my broadcast confirming a new destination. But the people on Route 29 who hadn't reached the fairgrounds yet heard only my broadcast and would now redirect to the school without ever entering the lot. The split was imperfect. The messages could interfere. But it was the best layering I could achieve with a PA system built for tractor announcements and a county EAS relay designed for tornado warnings. Harjo radioed at 4:08. Lena, I'm at a quarter tank. I can do maybe 20 more minutes of circles before I'm walking. Come to the fairgrounds, escort the convoy out. If I stop drawing this group, they'll drift back toward the lot. The lot will be empty by then. Will it? 400 people in the dark, starting cars, finding the road. That's not 5 minutes, Lena, that's 30, minimum. He was right. I was compressing timelines because I needed them to fit. The fairgrounds evacuation would take at least 30 minutes, and during that window, Harjo needed to keep the southern group occupied. If he ran out of fuel, the group would return to the lot while vehicles were still loading. How far can you get on a quarter tank? Depends on speed. 10, 12 miles at patrol speed. Then don't circle. Lead them away. Take them south on River Road as far as you can, then go dark, ditch the cruiser, and make your way to the school on foot. Silence. Kevin? You're asking me to abandon my vehicle. I'm asking you to use it up and then survive without it. Another silence. Then, if I go south on River Road, I pass the water treatment plant. It's fenced, elevated, has a control building with a steel door. If I ditch there, I can shelter until the group passes. Do it. Lena, that means I'm not at the school. I'm not escorting anyone. Marcus and Nuri can manage the convoy. I need the southern group pulled further than a hayfield. I need them gone. He said, copy. He said it the way people say words that function as signatures on documents they haven't read. I heard his engine accelerate, and the blue-red sweep of his light bar moved south on my mental map, pulling 20 or more infected bodies away from 400 living ones. And the math was correct, and the cost was a man alone at a water treatment plant with no vehicle and no backup, and the full knowledge that the dispatcher had spent him like a resource. At 4:12, the convoy began to move. Marcus radioed updates in 3-minute intervals. The first vehicle reached Fairgrounds Road without incident. The second followed. The third. A dark chain of cars moving at 15 miles per hour on a rural road in October, guided by nothing but the red taillights of the car ahead, and then I realized the problem. Taillights. Every car in the convoy had automatic taillights that activated with the engine. They couldn't turn them off. The convoy was a dotted red line visible from any elevation, and the infected on Route 29, the ones I'd told to shelter in place who hadn't listened, could see it. I radioed Marcus. Tell the convoy to tape over the taillights. Anything opaque. Clothing, bags, duct tape. Lena, these people just started moving in the dark. If I tell them to stop and tape their lights, half will panic, and the chain breaks. If they don't, they're a trail. Then it's a trail. We keep moving. Speed over concealment. He was right again. I was optimizing from a desk. He was in the field. I deferred. The convoy moved as a visible line, and I sat in my swivel chair and watched the clock, and waited to see what found them first. The convoy reached the school at 4:41. Vernon Briggs had the football field lights burning, and Marcus described the approach as driving toward a landed spaceship in a soybean field. 308 vehicles entered the school parking lot in a procession that took 19 minutes. Vernon and two parents he'd recruited directed traffic with flashlights held low, pointing at the ground. Dr. Chandrasekaran transferred the diabetic child directly into the school's health office, which had a cot and a functioning sink. The elderly man with the hip fracture was carried by four strangers through the gymnasium doors on a folding table someone had pulled from a classroom. The building worked. It worked the way the fairgrounds never could have. Walls that locked, a roof that sealed, a generator that hummed to life and gave them light that didn't bleed outside because the gymnasium had no windows. The cafeteria's walk-in cooler had been stocked for the week's lunch program. Industrial-sized cans of vegetables, bags of rice, cases of milk that were still cold. Vernon inventoried it with a clipboard and said it could sustain 800 people for 3 days, or the current population of approximately 900 for two. 900. The fairgrounds had held 400. The other 500 had come from the redirected broadcast people on Route 29 who'd heard my second message and driven to the school directly. My split signal had doubled the population at the shelter beyond what I'd modeled, and people were still arriving. Lena, Vernon radioed at 5:02. I've locked the main entrances, but people keep pulling up. They're banging on the doors. I can see them from the second-floor window. Some of them are just families, kids in the back seat. How do I look at a kid through the glass and not open the door? How many are outside? 30, 40, growing. Any infected among them? I can't tell. It's dark. Some of them are stumbling, but that could be exhaustion. This was the problem I had been generating all night without seeing its shape. Every broadcast, every correction, every redirect was an invitation. I was a signal tower telling people to come to a point, and a point has a capacity, and capacity has a boundary, and a boundary requires someone to stand at it and decide who passes through. I had made Vernon Briggs into a gatekeeper because I had made the school into a destination. And now a retired high school principal was standing at a window looking at families in a parking lot, trying to decide whether the stumbling man in the third row was tired or dead. Vernon, open the east entrance only. Funnel them through the music room corridor. It's a choke point. Station someone with a flashlight at the inner door. Anyone who can answer a question coherently comes in. Anyone who can't stays in the corridor with the outer door locked behind them. And if they're just scared, and if they can't answer because they're in shock, then they wait in the corridor until they can. Lena, that corridor has no heat. It has walls and a door. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, I became a principal because I believed every child deserved to be inside the building. He paused. Now you're asking me to build a sorting mechanism at my own front door. I'm not asking you to do anything, Vern. I'm telling you what I'd do if I were there. You're not here. That's the thing. You're in a booth 7 miles away telling people where to go, and then someone else has to decide what happens when they get there. That was the truest thing anyone said to me that night. I was the voice. I was the direction. I was the summons and the correction and the redirect. But I was never the door. I never had to look through the glass and see the face of the person my broadcast had called to a building I'd never entered. And I never had to decide whether that face was still human. Vernon opened the east entrance. 43 people came through the music room corridor. All of them were alive. One of them was bitten. Her name was Sandra. She was 51. She'd driven from Rockbridge County, one of the cross-county listeners I hadn't planned for, and she'd been bitten on the forearm while loading her car in her own driveway. She'd wrapped it with a dish towel and driven 31 miles to my voice. Marcus identified the wound during the corridor screening. Sandra told him what had happened without hesitation. She said she knew what it meant. She said she'd heard enough on the radio to understand. She said she'd come anyway because dying in a school gymnasium surrounded by people felt different than dying in her kitchen alone. Dr. Chandrasekaran examined the wound. She called me on the radio, and for the first time, her clinical detachment was indistinguishable from exhaustion. The bite broke skin. There's visible tissue damage. Based on what I've observed tonight in other patients, and I want to be clear that I have no epidemiological training and no diagnostic framework for this, the progression from bite to behavioral change has been approximately 90 minutes to 3 hours. How long since she was bitten? She says 2.5 hours. I did the math from my console. Sandra might have 30 minutes. She might have 3 hours. Priya couldn't tell me, and I couldn't tell Vernon, and Vernon couldn't tell the 900 people who were now sharing air with a woman whose biology was on a clock none of us could read. Where is she now? Music room. Marcus is with her. She's lucid. She's scared. She asked if her daughter could be contacted. What's the daughter's name? Elise. Lives in Roanoke. I tried the Roanoke area code. All circuits busy. I tried twice more. Nothing. I can't reach Roanoke. Priya said nothing for several seconds, then she's asking to stay. She says she'll move to an isolated room. She says she'll let someone watch her. She says if she changes, they should do what they have to do. Vernon came on the radio. I heard that. The answer's no. She can't stay in the building. She's a person, Vernon. She's a bitten person in a building with 46 children. I'm not debating this. Then where does she go? The corridor, the outer door, her car, I don't care. She cannot be inside the perimeter with minors. Marcus interjected. She drove 31 miles on my colleague's broadcast. She came here because we told her to come. We don't get to tell her to leave because she did what we said and got hurt doing it. I sat in my console chair and listened to 3 people argue about a woman I had summoned. Sandra had heard my voice at 1:43 a.m. She had followed my instruction. She had driven south, then redirected northeast, then arrived at the school I designated, and every step of her journey was a response to something I'd said into a microphone from a building I hadn't left. My broadcast had called her across a county line into a bite radius she would not have entered if she'd stayed home. I was the proximate cause of Sandra's wound, not directly, not legally, but causally, in the way that a current carries a leaf to the place where the leaf drowns. Put her in the boiler room, I said. Basement level, 1 entrance, a steel door with a bolt. Someone stays outside the door with a radio. If she changes, they seal it and she stays contained. If she doesn't change, she comes out at dawn. And if she changes and the person outside the door hesitates, Vernon asked, then you chose your door guard wrong. Who? I knew who. The only person at the school who had already demonstrated the capacity to make a decision and live with the weight. Marcus. He didn't respond for 10 seconds. Then he keyed the mic. Copy. I heard him walk Sandra down the corridor. I heard him explain the arrangement. I heard her say, thank you. I heard the boiler room door close. I heard the bolt slide. Then I heard Marcus sit down on the other side of the steel and say nothing. Because there was nothing to say to a woman whose clock was running down in a room you'd locked. By 5:30, The school had stabilized into something functional. Vernon managed the population with the organizational instincts of a man who'd run fire drills for 3 decades. He assigned classrooms as sleeping quarters, the library as a family area, the gymnasium as general overflow. The cafeteria served cold rice and canned vegetables at $5.15 to anyone who wanted to eat, which was fewer people than you'd expect. Terror suppresses appetite with chemical efficiency. I remained at my console. The call volume had dropped. Not because the crisis had eased, but because the people who were going to call had either already called, already reached shelter, or were no longer able to call. The silence on the phone lines was not peace. It was arithmetic, the subtraction of voices from a population. At 5:44, Harjo radioed from the water treatment plant. He ditched the cruiser at the gate and locked himself in the control building. The southern infected group had followed his light bar past the plant and continued south along River Road. He was alone, uninjured, and conserving his radio battery. He asked about the fairgrounds. "Empty," I said. "Everyone's at the school." "Good. Your second call was the right one. My first call nearly killed them. Your first call got them out of their houses. Some of those houses are gone now, Lena. I drove past Briarfield on the way south. The infected went door to door. The houses that were empty, the ones where people listened to you and left those families, are alive at the school right now." I hadn't considered that, and I'd been tracking my errors so precisely that I'd lost sight of the baseline. Without the broadcast, 14,000 people would have been in their homes, asleep, doors unlocked, with no warning at all. My 1:43 message was imperfect, misdirected, and geographically naive. It also woke people up. It told them something was wrong before the something reached their doors. The people who died on Route 29, the people who were crushed against the fairgrounds fence, they died in motion, heading toward a chance. The alternative was dying in bed. I don't say this to absolve myself. Absolution isn't a thing that applies to choices made with partial information at 1:43 in the morning. I say it because the ledger is real, and the ledger has 2 columns, and I'd been staring at one so hard I'd forgotten the other existed. At 5:58, Marcus radioed from outside the boiler room. "She's still talking to me, through the door. She's telling me about Elise. Her daughter's a veterinarian in Roanoke. She has 2 cats named after Greek philosophers. Is she symptomatic? No, lucid, calm. She says the arm hurts less, not more. She says that worries her because she thinks it means the nerves are going. Priya's assessment? Priya says 3-hour window is maximum based on what she saw at the hospital. Sandra's at 3 hours 20. Every minute past the window without change is a data point. Not enough data points to conclude anything. I know. But Lena, she's talking about her daughter's cats. She knows the names. She knows the breeds. She's making jokes. Whatever this thing does, it hasn't done it yet. At 6:15, the first gray light appeared in the east windows of the school. Vernon reported it from the second-floor hallway like a man reporting the sighting of land from a ship. The football field lights were still burning. The parking lot was full and still. No infected were visible from any window. The night was ending. Not the crisis. The crisis had no interest in the clock. But the darkness that had made everything worse, that had turned headlights into lures and parking lots into traps and chain-link fences into illusions of safety. The darkness was lifting, and in its absence, the world became something you could at least see before it reached you. I sat in my swivel chair. I looked at my legal pad. 47 pages of handwritten notes, call logs, timestamps, names, decisions, and corrections. The record of a night in which I had been the only voice in the dark for 60 square miles, and every word I'd said had shaped the landscape of who lived and who did not. At 6:40, Marcus radioed 2 words. "She's clear." Sandra had passed the 4-hour mark without symptom progression. Pruitt examined her through a partially open boiler room door, pulse steady, pupils reactive, speech coherent, wound showing signs of normal inflammatory response rather than the necrotizing pattern she'd observed in turn patients at the hospital. It wasn't a diagnosis, it wasn't a clearance. It was a provisional non-event in a data set of 1, and Pruitt said so explicitly over the radio. "I'm not saying she's immune. I'm not saying the bite wasn't infectious. I'm saying she hasn't turned in 4 hours, and the others I observed turned in 90 minutes to 2. That's all I can say." Vernon opened the boiler room door at 6:48. Sandra walked out on her own feet, and Marcus, who had sat on the concrete floor outside that door for 2 hours and 40 minutes, stood up and extended his hand to her, and she took it and said, "Your floor is terrible." And he laughed. And it was the first laughter I'd heard on the radio all night, and it made my chest crack in a way I wasn't prepared for. Then the school went into daylight operations, and the questions changed. The nighttime questions had been navigational. Where do I go? What do I do? Is it safe? The daylight questions were political. Who was in charge? When would the government arrive? How long were they expected to stay? Was the water safe? Was the food enough? Who decided who got the classrooms and who got the gym floor? Why were some people's cars blocked in? Why wasn't someone doing something about the smell from the bathroom corridors? Vernon handled these with patience and deflection. But by 7:30, a knot of men had formed in the cafeteria demanding to speak with whoever had made the broadcast. They wanted accountability. They wanted to know why they'd been sent to the fairgrounds first. They wanted to know about the vehicles abandoned on Route 29, vehicles that contained supplies, medications, belongings. One man said his wife's insulin was in a cooler in their car on the highway shoulder, and he needed someone to authorize a retrieval run. Vernon told them the broadcast had come from county dispatch. He told them dispatch was still operational. He told them Lena Guidry was the voice they'd heard. A man named Tom Fessler took the radio from Marcus and spoke directly to me. "You sent us to the fairgrounds. There was nothing there. No supplies, no guards, no plan. My family sat in a parking lot for an hour while those things walked out of the trees. My 6-year-old watched a man get pulled out of his truck window. You did that? Your broadcast did that." I could hear the cafeteria behind him. The rustling of 900 people who were alive because they'd followed a voice that got the geography wrong, and then corrected it too late, and then corrected it again in time. "Mr. Fessler, you're right. The fairgrounds were a mistake. I sent you there based on incomplete information, and I corrected the broadcast as soon as I understood the problem. The correction was also incomplete. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. So what good are you? I'm the only person transmitting on this frequency. That's what good I am. It's not enough. It wasn't enough at 1:43, and it's not enough now, but it's what exists." He didn't respond. I heard the radio change hands. Marcus came back on. "Lena, the cafeteria group wants to send a team back to Route 29 to recover vehicles and supplies. 5 volunteers, 2 trucks, daylight run. The road isn't clear. They know. They want to go anyway." I looked at my legal pad. I looked at the call log from 3:28, when Marcus first reported movement at the tree line. I looked at Harjo's description of infected following headlights south. The road between the school and the fairgrounds was 4 miles of open farmland with no cover, and I had no intelligence on what occupied it now. I can't authorize that. They're not asking for authorization. They're asking for information. Road conditions, known hazard points, anything from your call log that helps them plan a route. I gave them everything I had, every note, every timestamp, every reported sighting. I gave it freely because it was the only thing I could give, and withholding it would have been the final act of a dispatcher who believed her voice mattered more than their legs. The retrieval team left at 8:15. Tom Fessler drove the lead truck. Dale, the construction foreman from the fairgrounds, drove the second. They took Route 11 south to the Fairgrounds Road turnoff and approached Route 29 from the east, rather than backtracking the convoy's path. Marcus monitored from the school roof with a pair of binoculars a parent had found in their car. I stayed on the radio. That was all I could do. Stay on the radio, be the voice in the frequency. Provide what I had, which was information shaped by a night of errors, corrections, and the slow accumulation of knowledge purchased at the price of the people who taught it to me. The retrieval team reached Route 29 at 8:31 and found the road passable, but scarred. Fessler described abandoned vehicles with doors hanging open. A sedan with a shattered windshield and blood on the hood. A motorcycle on its side with the engine still ticking. He described 6 infected visible in a field 200 yards west of the road, moving south in a loose cluster, not reacting to the trucks. They're slower in daylight, he said. Or these ones are, and they're not tracking us. Drive quiet. Keep the windows up. Don't stop unless you reach your target vehicle. They recovered 9 vehicles in 40 minutes. Fessler found his wife's insulin cooler intact, a woman's heart medication, a child's car seat that someone had asked about 3 times during the night. They drove the recovered vehicles back to the school in a loose column, and when they pulled into the parking lot, a small crowd was waiting at the entrance, and the sound they made was not cheering, but something closer to exhalation. The sound of people whose belongings had been returned from a place they'd been told they couldn't go. At 9:10, a new signal appeared on the emergency band. Not my broadcast. A different voice. Male official cadence, identifying as Virginia National Guard, Task Force Echo, establishing a communication point at the Staunton Armory, 42 miles south. They were requesting all functional county dispatch stations to check in. I checked in. I gave them my name, my station, my county, the school shelter location, the approximate population, the medical situation, the infected movement patterns I'd logged through the night. The guard operator took it down and said, "Garfield, you're the first county that's called back on this frequency. Most of the others are dark." "How many counties are dark?" "In our sector, 11 of 15. "What happened to their dispatchers?" He didn't answer that. He said a convoy was staging for northbound relief operations, and Garfield County was now on the list. Estimated arrival, 8 to 14 hours. He said to maintain shelter discipline, conserve resources, and keep the frequency open. 8 to 14 hours. I relayed this to Vernon, who relayed it to the school. The reaction was not relief, it was the particular stillness of people calculating whether the number they'd been given is real. I called Kevin Harjo at the water treatment plant. He answered after 4 rings. "Guards coming," I said. 8 to 14 hours. "I heard. I've been monitoring." "Can you make it to the school?" "Probably. It's 2 miles through open ground. I'll wait until midday when visibility's best." Kevin, thank you for the light bar, for pulling them south. "Don't thank me. You spend me and I let you. That's how the night works. Everyone got spent by someone." He was right. I had spent Kevin Harjo. I had spent Marcus Yoon. I had spent Vernon Briggs and Dale and Nuri and Priya and Sandra and every person who answered a phone or opened a door or sat outside a boiler room because my voice told them to be somewhere, and they went. I had spent them because I had no other currency. The dispatcher's only resource is other people's willingness to do what the voice says, and I had drawn that account down to the metal. I pulled my headset off for the first time in 10 hours. The foam pads had left grooves in the cartilage of my ears. The console hummed. The broadcast was still looping my third version, the school redirect, playing on 90-second repeat to an audience I could no longer quantify. I stayed on shift until the guard convoy arrived at 6:18 p.m., 19 hours and 17 minutes at the console. When the relief dispatcher, a guardsman named Pruitt, who looked approximately 20 years old, sat down and put on the headset, I stood up, and my knees buckled, and I had to hold the desk. I drove to the school. I walked through the gymnasium and saw the people I'd moved through the night like pieces across a board I'd drawn wrong. Some of them recognized my voice when I spoke. A woman grabbed my arm and said, "You saved us." A man turned away and wouldn't look at me. Both were correct. I never re-recorded the broadcast. The third version is still on the relay server. Technically, if the system reactivated, my voice would go out again, telling people to drive dark toward the football field lights at Garfield County High School. The lights are off now. The school's empty. But the instruction persists in the infrastructure, waiting for a power surge or a system reset to send it back into the air. I think about that. A voice without a speaker, looping in a machine, telling people to go somewhere that no longer means what it meant when I said it. That's what I am now, a frequency. Still transmitting. No longer sure who's listening.